My name is Madison, and I am 28 years old. 3 weeks ago, my entire world crumbled when my mother forgot to hang up our phone call. What I heard in those devastating minutes changed everything I believed about family, love, and loyalty. The words still echo in my mind. She's a burden. We need to get her out of that house. Today, I signed the papers to sell my $1 million home. But this is not a story about defeat. This is about the sweetest revenge a daughter could ever serve. Before we dive into how I discovered the shocking truth about my own family's betrayal and how I turned their greed against them, I want to connect with all of you watching. Drop a comment and let me know where you are tuning in from. Hit that like button if you have ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted completely, and do not forget to subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. You will not believe what my own mother was planning behind my back. The call started innocently enough. Mom had phoned me on that Tuesday evening in March, her voice bright and cheerful as always. We chatted about my work at the marketing firm, her book club meeting, and plans for Easter dinner. I was multitasking, organizing client files while we talked, when suddenly her voice became muffled and distant. "Mom, are you there?" I asked, but heard only silence followed by rustling sounds. She had clearly placed the phone down, thinking she had ended the call. I was about to hang up when I heard her voice again, clearer, now talking to someone else in the room. "Richard, she has no idea what we have been planning," Mom said, her tone completely different from the warm, loving voice she had just used with me. "Madison thinks we actually care about her keeping that ridiculous house." My blood turned to ice. Richard was my stepfather, whom Mom had married 2 years ago after Dad passed away. I had always felt something was off about him, but Mom seemed happy, so I kept my concerns to myself. "The property taxes alone are killing her," Richard replied, his voice carrying that condescending tone I had grown to hate. "She is too proud to admit she cannot afford it, but we both know she is drowning financially." "Exactly," Mom continued, and I could hear her moving around, probably in the kitchen. "She inherited that house from her father, but she has no business trying to maintain it on her salary. The mortgage payments, the upkeep, the utilities, it is all too much for someone her age." I felt sick. They were talking about the Victorian house Dad had left me, the one place that felt like home after losing him to cancer 3 years ago. Yes, the expenses were significant, but I had been managing just fine. I worked extra freelance projects and had even taken on a roommate to help with costs. "Here is what I have been thinking," Mom said, her voice taking on a calculating tone that I had never heard before. "We convince her that she needs to sell. Tell her we are worried about her financial future, that the house is too much responsibility. Once she sells, we help her find a nice little apartment." And then Richard asked, though I suspected he already knew the answer, "Then she will need somewhere to put that money while she figures out her next steps. We offer to help invest it, manage it for her. She trusts me completely. She would never question my advice about finances." The room started spinning. They were planning to manipulate me into selling my home and then somehow gain control of the proceeds. But there was more. "She is so naive about money," Mom continued with a laugh that made my stomach turn. "Remember how easily we convinced her to co-sign that loan for the renovations on our place? She never even read the paperwork properly. Wait, what loan? I had helped them with some financial advice when they were updating their kitchen, but I had never co-signed anything. Or had I? My mind raced back to that day 6 months ago when Mom had brought over a stack of papers saying she needed my signature as a witness for some contractor agreements. "That was brilliant," Richard chimed in. "Now, if anything goes wrong with our mortgage, she is on the hook for it too. She has no idea she is legally responsible for our debt now." My hands started shaking. Those papers I had signed without reading carefully. They were not witness signatures. They had tricked me into becoming financially liable for their home loan. The betrayal cut so deep I could barely breathe. "The best part is she actually thinks we care about her well-being," Mom said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Poor Madison, trying so hard to keep up appearances with that house. She is becoming such a burden, always calling with problems about the roof or the heating system. I am tired of pretending to care. A burden." My own mother had called me a burden. Once we get her money secured under our management, we can start using it for our own investments, Richard added. She will never know the difference. We just tell her the market is down or that we are being conservative with her funds. And if she ever gets suspicious, Mom asked, who is she going to complain to? We are her only family now. Besides, by then it will be too late. The money will be tied up in investments that only we control. I realized I was holding my breath. These two people whom I had trusted with my life were actively plotting to steal my inheritance and my future. They had already manipulated me into financial liability for their home, and now they wanted to take everything else. The conversation continued for another few minutes with them discussing specific banks and investment strategies, but I had heard enough. I carefully ended the call on my end, making sure not to make any noise that might alert them to the fact that I had been listening. I sat in my living room, surrounded by the antique furniture and family photos that Dad had cherished, feeling completely alone for the first time since his death. The house suddenly felt different. Not like the sanctuary it had always been, but like a target. Everything I owned, everything Dad had worked for and left to me, was under attack by the very people who should have been protecting me. But as the initial shock wore off, something else began to grow inside me. Not sadness or despair, but a cold, calculating anger. They thought I was naive and easily manipulated. They thought I would never discover their plan. They had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly how smart and resourceful their target really was. If they wanted to play games with my financial future, I was going to make sure I won. I did not sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table with every financial document I could find, piecing together the full scope of what Mom and Richard had done to me. The cosigner paperwork was exactly what I feared. I was legally responsible for their entire mortgage, nearly $400,000 of debt that I had never intended to take on. But as I dug deeper into the documents, I discovered something they probably had not expected me to find. The loan terms included a clause that if the primary borrowers defaulted or engaged in fraudulent activity, the cosigner had the right to assume full ownership of the property to protect their financial interests. They had been so focused on tricking me into signing that they had not paid attention to the fine print that could actually work in my favor. By dawn, I had formulated the beginning of a plan. But first, I needed to understand exactly what they thought they knew about my financial situation. If they believed I was struggling to afford my house, there had to be a reason. I started reviewing my recent conversations with Mom, looking for clues about what information I might have inadvertently shared. Then I remembered. Last month, when the heating system had broken down and required an expensive repair, I had called Mom to vent about the unexpected expense. I had mentioned putting it on my credit card temporarily until my next freelance payment came through. To her, that probably sounded like financial desperation rather than just normal cash flow management. I also recalled mentioning that I was considering taking on more freelance work to build up my emergency fund faster. Again, to someone looking for signs of financial trouble, this could have been interpreted as proof that I was struggling rather than simply being responsible about my future. They had taken my normal financial caution and twisted it into evidence of failure. But their misunderstanding of my actual situation was about to become their biggest mistake. Over the next few days, I began implementing the first phase of my plan. I started having more frequent conversations with Mom, each one carefully designed to reinforce her belief that I was in financial trouble, while gathering more information about their intentions. Mom, I have been thinking about what you said last week about being smart with money, I said during one call, referring to a comment she had made about young people not understanding investments. Oh, sweetie, I am always here to help you with financial decisions, she replied, her voice syrupy with fake concern. You know I only want what is best for you. I have been wondering if maybe I should consider selling the house, I said, putting just the right amount of uncertainty in my voice. The expenses really are adding up, and I do not want to end up in trouble down the road. The eagerness in her voice was unmistakable. That is such a mature way to think about it, Madison. You know, Richard and I have been talking, and we think that might be a very wise decision for you. Really, you do not think Dad would be disappointed if I sold his house? Honey, your father would want you to be financially secure above everything else. He would not want you struggling to keep up with a house that is too expensive for your situation. Too expensive for my situation. If she only knew that I had actually paid off the mortgage early using a combination of Dad's life insurance money and my own savings. If she knew that I had nearly $200,000 in various investment accounts that I had built up over the past few years. If she knew that the house was generating rental income from my roommate that more than covered all the utilities and maintenance costs. But I was not going to enlighten her about any of that. Instead, I was going to let her continue believing that I was the perfect victim for their scheme. What do you think I should do with the money from the sale? I asked innocently. Well, that is a big decision. You want to make sure it is invested properly, so it can grow over time. Richard actually has a lot of experience with real estate investments and portfolio management. Maybe we could help you explore some options. There it was. The setup delivered exactly as I had overheard them planning. That would be amazing, I gushed. I really do not know much about investing, and I trust you and Richard completely. Of course, sweetheart. We are family. We will make sure your money is working as hard as possible for your future. After I hung up, I sat back and marveled at how easily the lies came to her. The woman who had raised me, who had comforted me through every childhood disappointment and celebrated every achievement, was now actively deceiving me for financial gain. But I was not the helpless victim they imagined. While they were planning to steal my inheritance, I was planning something much more sophisticated. I spent the following week consulting with a lawyer who specialized in financial fraud and elder abuse. When I explained the situation, including the loan documents they had tricked me into signing, her eyes lit up with the same cold anger I had been feeling. This is textbook fraud, she told me. They obtained your signature under false pretenses with clear intent to make you financially liable without your knowledge. But more importantly, they are now planning to engage in investment fraud and theft. What are my options? I asked. Legally, you have several paths. But if you want to catch them in the act and ensure they face full consequences, you could work with authorities to document their fraud attempt. We could set up a situation where they incriminate themselves completely. What would that involve? She smiled, and it reminded me of my own expression when I had first started planning my revenge. You give them exactly what they think they want. You sell your house, you trust them with the money, and you let them walk right into a trap that will cost them everything. But what if something goes wrong? What if I actually lose my money? You would not be using real money, she explained. We can create accounts and documentation that appear legitimate to them, but are actually controlled by law enforcement. They will think they are stealing from you, but they will actually be creating evidence of their own crimes. As I left her office that day, I felt something I had not experienced since that terrible phone call. I felt powerful. They had thought they were hunting a naive young woman who would be easy to manipulate and rob. Instead, they had chosen to target someone who was about to turn their own greed into the weapon that destroyed them. The game was officially on. The next phase required careful coordination with law enforcement and my attorney. Detective Sarah Chen from the Financial Crimes Unit was assigned to my case, and her enthusiasm for catching white-collar criminals was exactly what I needed. Cases like this are incredibly satisfying to work, she told me during our first meeting. Family financial abuse is one of the most underreported crimes because victims often feel too embarrassed or guilty to come forward. Your willingness to help us build a case could prevent them from doing this to others. We developed a comprehensive plan that would give Mom and Richard enough rope to hang themselves with. The key was creating a believable scenario where they could attempt their theft while law enforcement documented every step of their crime. First, we needed to establish my fake financial vulnerability. I started making comments to Mom about unexpected expenses, missed freelance payments, and growing anxiety about money. Each conversation was recorded with her consent, as she was legally considered a suspect in an ongoing investigation. Mom, I think I need to seriously consider selling, I said during one particularly Oscar-worthy performance. The property taxes are due next month, and I honestly do not know how I am going to cover them along with everything else. Oh, honey, that sounds incredibly stressful, she replied, but I could hear the excitement underneath her sympathetic tone. Have you thought about getting the house appraised, just to understand what your options might be? I actually already did, I lied smoothly. The appraiser said it could sell for around $900,000, maybe a little more in the current market. The silence on the other end of the line told me everything I needed to know. She was calculating, planning, practically salivating at the thought of getting her hands on nearly $1 million. That is a substantial amount, she finally said, her voice carefully controlled. You would want to be very careful about how you handle that kind of money. One wrong investment decision could cost you your entire future. I know, and that is what scares me. I have no idea what to do with that much money. Well, like I mentioned before, Richard has experience with large investments. Maybe we could all sit down together and discuss some options, just so you can understand what possibilities exist. The trap was being set perfectly. Meanwhile, Detective Chen was working with federal authorities to create convincing fake financial accounts and investment portfolios that would appear legitimate to anyone without law enforcement access. These accounts would be monitored continuously, so any attempt to move or steal money would be documented in real time. But I needed more than just law enforcement on my side. I needed allies who could help me navigate the emotional complexity of what I was about to do. I reached out to my cousin Jessica, Dad's niece, who had always been suspicious of Richard's intentions toward our family. When I told her about the overheard phone conversation and the legal trap we were setting, her reaction was immediate and fierce. I knew something was wrong with that man, she said, pacing around my living room. The way he looked at this house during the funeral like he was appraising it. And how quickly he moved in with your mom after they got married. I should have said something. You could not have known they would go this far, I assured her. But I could have been more supportive of you keeping this house. I remember Mom telling me that some people in the family thought you were being impractical trying to maintain such an expensive property on your own. This was news to me. Other family members have been discussing my finances. Jessica looked uncomfortable. Madison, there have been conversations. Nothing malicious, just people wondering if you were in over your head. Your mom has been very vocal about her concerns for your financial future. The manipulation had been even more extensive than I realized. Mom had been working to turn other family members against my decision to keep the house, probably laying groundwork for their eventual intervention in my finances. Who else has she talked to about this? Your Aunt Susan, definitely. And I think she mentioned something to your grandmother about you struggling with money. My grandmother, who had been carefully saving money to help with my future wedding or a down payment on a bigger house someday. If Mom had convinced her that I was in financial trouble, Grandma might even offer to help, providing Mom and Richard with access to even more money to steal. The scope of their planned theft was growing, and so was my determination to stop them. I decided to expand the investigation to include these other potential victims. With Detective Chen's approval, I started having careful conversations with Grandma and Aunt Susan, ostensibly seeking their advice about my financial struggles, while actually documenting what Mom had told them about my situation. Grandma, I wanted to talk to you about something Mom mentioned, I said during our weekly phone call. She said you might have some advice about managing money during difficult times. Oh, sweetheart, your mother told me you have been having some trouble with those house expenses. I have been so worried about you. What exactly did she tell you? She said you were putting everything on credit cards and that you might lose the house if something did not change soon. She was very concerned that you were too proud to ask for help. Credit cards, losing the house, too proud to ask for help. None of it was true, but it painted a perfect picture of someone who would be grateful for financial rescue and unlikely to question the motives of the people providing it. She also mentioned that she and Richard might be able to help you explore some investment options if you decided to sell, Grandma continued. I think that sounds very wise. They seem to have done well with their own finances. Their own finances, which were built on a mortgage I was unknowingly responsible for and maintained through deception. Actually, Grandma, I was wondering if you might want to be involved in those investment discussions. Mom said you have always been good with money. Oh, I would love to help however I can. And Madison, I want you to know that I have some savings set aside that you could use if you need it. I was planning to give it to you eventually anyway. There it was. They were not just planning to steal my money. They were positioning themselves to potentially access Grandma's savings as well. That evening, I sat in Dad's old study surrounded by his books and his photographs, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on my shoulders. This was not just about getting revenge anymore. This was about protecting my entire family from predators who happened to share our last name. I called Detective Chen with an update about the expanded scope of their potential crimes. This is actually perfect, she told me. The more ambitious their scheme, the more evidence we can gather, and the more serious the charges will be. Elder financial abuse carries significantly heavier penalties than simple theft. How much longer before we spring the trap soon? We need to let them think they are in complete control, that their plan is working perfectly. The best time to arrest them will be when they actually attempt to move money from the accounts they think belong to you. And then they discover that their victims were not as helpless as they assumed, and that their greed has cost them everything they thought they were clever enough to steal. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the house that had caused all this trouble simply by existing, simply by being worth something they wanted to take. Dad had left it to me because he trusted me to protect it and the legacy it represented. Tomorrow, I would take the next step toward ensuring that trust was not misplaced. The meeting was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon at their house. I arrived with a folder full of fake documents that Detective Chen had helped me prepare, including fabricated real estate listings, loan pre-approval letters, and investment brochures. My hands were steady, but my heart was racing as I knocked on the door. Madison, sweetheart, Mom embraced me with what felt like genuine warmth, and for a moment I almost questioned whether I had misunderstood everything. Then Richard appeared behind her with that calculating smile, and I remembered exactly why I was there. "We are so proud of you for making this difficult decision," Richard said as we settled into their living room. "It takes real maturity to recognize when you are in over your head financially." I had been wearing a wire for weeks now, and every word was being recorded by the team of investigators positioned nearby. This conversation would either give us everything we needed to prosecute them, or reveal that I had somehow misunderstood their intentions. "I brought all the paperwork from the realtor," I said, spreading the fake documents across their coffee table. "The listing goes live next week, and she thinks we could have offers within days." Mom leaned forward, eagerly scanning the fabricated price estimates. $950,000, Madison. That is even more than you expected. "I know, but after the realtor fees and closing costs, I will probably clear around $870,000. Still a lot of money, but I am terrified of making the wrong decisions with it." "That is exactly why you need experienced guidance," Richard said, pulling out a leather portfolio. "I have been researching some excellent investment opportunities that would be perfect for someone in your situation." He began showing me glossy brochures for investment funds that Detective Chen had already verified were either completely fake or schemes he was involved in that would give him access to investor money. Every word he spoke was building our case. "This particular fund has been averaging 12% returns annually," he explained, pointing to fabricated charts. "If we invested your $800,000 here, you could be looking at over $90,000 in passive income every year." "That sounds incredible, but how would it work exactly? Would the money still be mine?" "Of course it would still be yours," Mom jumped in quickly. "Richard would just manage it for you, make sure it is invested properly. You would get quarterly statements showing how it is performing. And we would not take any fees for managing it," Richard added with false generosity. "We are family. We just want to see you secure." I pretended to consider this while internally marveling at their audacity. They were describing a scenario where they would have complete control over my money while providing me with fake statements to keep me unaware of the theft. "What would I need to sign?" I asked innocently. Richard produced another set of documents. "Just some standard investment management papers. Nothing complicated, just giving us the authority to make investment decisions on your behalf." I took the papers and pretended to read through them, though I already knew what they contained thanks to our legal preparation. They were essentially blank checks that would give Richard complete access to any accounts under my name. "This all looks good, but I have one concern," I said, setting the papers down. "What if something happens to you guys? How would I access my money?" "Nothing is going to happen to us," Mom laughed. "But if you are worried, we can add Jessica as a backup contact on the accounts." Jessica, who was currently sitting in a van outside wearing her own recording device as part of our expanded investigation. "Actually, that brings up something else," I continued. "Grandma mentioned that she might want to invest some of her savings in the same funds. Would that be possible?" The look that passed between Mom and Richard was captured clearly by the hidden cameras Detective Chen had installed earlier that week. Pure greed, followed by quick calculation. "Your grandmother is very wise to think about growing her savings at her age," Richard said slowly. "We could certainly explore options for her as well. She has about 200,000 saved up from Grandpa's pension and some investments she made years ago," I said, watching their expressions carefully. "She was thinking about putting it all into whatever I choose since she trusts my judgment." "That would be a substantial combined portfolio," Mom said, her voice tight with excitement she was trying to hide. "Over $1 million invested properly could really set up both of your futures." "Should I bring her to the next meeting?" I asked. "Absolutely," Richard said immediately. "We can set up similar arrangements for both of you. Families should stick together when it comes to financial security." I signed their fraudulent documents with a pen that contained a hidden camera, capturing every detail of the paperwork they were using to steal from me. As my signature dried on the fake investment contracts, Detective Chen was receiving real-time updates, confirming that we had documented their complete criminal conspiracy. "There is one more thing," I said as we finished up. "When should I expect to see the first returns on my investment?" "Give it about 6 weeks for everything to be properly allocated," Richard replied. "Then you will start seeing quarterly statements and monthly income deposits." 6 weeks. That was how long they thought they could delay providing me with any information about my money while they moved it into accounts they controlled. "This feels like such a relief," I said, standing up and hugging them both. I was so scared about making these decisions alone, but knowing I have family looking out for me makes all the difference. "That is what family is for," Mom said, squeezing me tightly. "We will always take care of you, Madison." As I drove away from their house, I called Detective Chen to confirm that we had everything we needed. "It is perfect," she said, barely containing her excitement. They laid out their entire scheme, admitted they would have control over the money, and even expanded it to include plans for defrauding your grandmother. "We have conspiracy, elder financial abuse, and fraud charges with ironclad evidence. When will you arrest them?" "Tomorrow morning. We will execute search warrants on their house and financial records simultaneously. They will never see it coming." That night, I sat in my living room looking around at the house they had tried to force me to sell, thinking about the trust they had tried to steal, and marveling at how completely they had underestimated the woman they thought they were, victimizing. Tomorrow they would discover that their perfect victims had actually been the architects of their downfall. I was drinking coffee in my kitchen when my phone rang at 7:30 the next morning. The caller ID showed Mom's number, but the voice that greeted me was hysterical and barely recognizable. "Madison, you have to help us. The police are here. They are saying we committed fraud. This is all some terrible mistake." I took a slow sip of my coffee before responding. "Mom, what are you talking about? What police? They have search warrants. They are going through all of our financial records. Richard is in handcuffs. They are saying we tried to steal money from you and Grandma." "That is insane," I said, putting just the right amount of confusion and concern in my voice. "Why would they think that I do not know? They keep asking about investment documents and recordings of our conversations. Madison, you have to tell them that we were just trying to help you." In the background, I could hear Detective Chen's voice reading Richard his rights and the sound of boxes being loaded with evidence. Months of planning were coming to fruition in real time. "Mom, I need you to calm down and tell me exactly what they are accusing you of." They are saying we tricked you into signing loan documents and that we were planning to steal the money from your house sale, but that is not true. We were just trying to help you invest wisely. Wait, what loan documents? I never signed any loan documents. The silence on the other end told me she was realizing how much she had just revealed. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller, more careful. The papers you signed 6 months ago when we were getting the kitchen renovated, they were just witness signatures. Mom, the police are there because those were not witness signatures, were they? Another long silence. Then Madison, I can explain everything. It is not what it looks like. What does it look like? They are saying, we made you legally responsible for our mortgage without telling you. But we never intended for you to actually pay anything. It was just a formality the bank required. I almost had to admire how quickly she was trying to construct a new lie to cover the old ones. Even caught red-handed, she was still attempting to manipulate me. And what about this investment plan they mentioned? We were going to help you invest your money. That is not illegal. We are family. Mom, did you really think I was struggling financially? Well, you seemed overwhelmed by the house expenses, and we just wanted to help you make smart decisions. Or did you see an opportunity to steal my inheritance? The question hung in the air between us. For the first time in our conversation, she had no immediate response. Madison, honey, you do not understand. I understand perfectly. I set down my coffee cup and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Dad had planted years ago. I understand that you forgot to hang up the phone 3 weeks ago. I understand that I heard every word of your plan to manipulate me into selling this house and giving you control of my money. I understand that you have been lying to our entire family about my financial situation to set up your theft. The sharp intake of breath told me she was finally grasping the reality of her situation. You heard. I heard everything. How I was a burden. How naive I was about money. How you were going to use my trust against me to steal everything Dad left me. I heard you planning to defraud Grandma too. Madison, please, you have to understand. I understand that the woman who raised me decided to become a criminal rather than simply be proud of how well I was actually doing. We needed the money, the house, the lifestyle Richard is used to. We could not afford it on our own. You have so much and you are so young, we thought. You thought I would never find out. You thought I was too trusting and too stupid to protect myself. By now I could hear Detective Chen speaking to Mom directly, and I knew the phone call was about to end. Madison, please, you have to help us. Tell them, this is all a misunderstanding. We are family, we were family, I said quietly. Before you decided to steal from me. The line went dead, as the police confiscated her phone as evidence. Within an hour, Jessica called me with updates from the family network. Grandma is in shock, she reported. When the police called to warn her about the potential threat to her savings, she could not believe your mom would do something like this. How is she handling it? She keeps saying she should have known something was wrong when your mom was so insistent about you being in financial trouble. Grandma said she offered to help you directly multiple times, but your mom always redirected the conversation toward investment management instead. And Aunt Susan, furious. Apparently your mom had approached her about a family investment pool that would have included all of our inheritance money from various relatives. Susan was actually considering it before all this came out. The scope of their intended theft was even larger than we had documented. They had been planning to defraud potentially dozens of family members under the guise of professional investment management. That afternoon, Detective Chen called with the formal update. Richard broke during questioning, she told me. Once we showed him the recordings and the evidence of the fraudulent loan documents, he started trying to pin everything on your mother. Said the whole thing was her idea, and that he just went along with it. And Mom, still maintaining that they were just trying to help you, but the evidence is overwhelming. The fake investment brochures, the accounts they had set up to receive your money, the plans to expand the scheme to other family members, it is all documented. What charges are they facing? Multiple counts of fraud, conspiracy, elder financial abuse, and forgery. With Richard's criminal history, turns out he has done this before, with a previous wife. They are looking at significant prison time. He has done this before. Your mother was not his first victim. He has a pattern of targeting widows with assets and manipulating them into financial schemes. The difference is that this time his target had a daughter who was smart enough to fight back. As I hung up the phone, I realized that for the first time in weeks, the house felt peaceful again. The threat was over. The people who had planned to steal my future were facing the consequences of their choices. But the emotional reckoning was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the same kitchen where I had overheard the conversation that changed everything, but the house felt completely different now. The legal proceedings were complete, with Mom and Richard both sentenced to 5 years in prison for their crimes. More importantly, I had discovered who my real family was. The trial had been emotionally brutal. Mom's defense attorney had tried to paint me as an ungrateful daughter who had misunderstood her mother's well-meaning attempts to help. They claimed the loan document deception was a mistake, that the investment scheme was legitimate, and that I had manipulated law enforcement into pursuing charges against my own family. But the evidence was overwhelming. The recordings, the fake investment documents, Richard's history of similar crimes, and testimony from other family members about the lies they had been told painted a clear picture of calculated fraud. When the judge read the sentence, I felt a complex mixture of relief, sadness, and something that might have been closure. Grandma had been my strongest supporter throughout the legal process. "Your father would be so proud of how you protected yourself and all of us," she told me after the sentencing. "He always said you had his strength and his principles." She was right about Dad's strength, but I had learned that strength sometimes means accepting help from the people who genuinely love you. Jessica had moved in as my roommate permanently, not because I needed help with expenses, but because we both discovered how much we enjoyed each other's company. Aunt Susan had become a regular visitor, often bringing her kids over to play in the yard that Dad had designed for family gatherings. The house that Mom and Richard had seen as a burden became the center of a new kind of family, one built on honesty, respect, and genuine care rather than manipulation and greed. I also learned that my financial situation was even better than I had realized. With the fraudulent mortgage documents voided, I was no longer responsible for their debt. The legal proceedings had frozen their assets, and when everything was settled, I actually recovered money they had already stolen from various family members through other schemes. But the most unexpected development was professional. The marketing firm where I worked had been following my case, and when they learned about how I had documented and exposed such an elaborate fraud scheme, they offered me a position in their corporate security division. Apparently, my skills at uncovering deception and building evidence were exactly what they needed for investigating corporate fraud cases. "You turned a personal betrayal into a masterclass in investigation," my new supervisor explained. "We need people who can think strategically under pressure and who understand how emotional manipulation works in financial crimes." The work was fascinating and felt deeply meaningful. I was using the skills I had developed during the worst experience of my life to help other people protect themselves from similar predators. On the anniversary of that terrible phone call, I hosted a family dinner in Dad's old dining room. Jessica, Grandma, Aunt Susan, her kids, and several cousins gathered around the table that had witnessed so many important family moments over the years. "I want to say something," I announced as we finished dessert. "A year ago, I thought I knew what family meant. I thought it was about blood relationships and unconditional loyalty. I learned the hard way that some people will exploit those assumptions to hurt the people who trust them most." I looked around the table at these people who had supported me through everything, who had never asked me to change or questioned my decisions, who had celebrated my strength rather than trying to exploit my vulnerabilities. But I also learned that real family is about the people who choose to love and protect each other, regardless of whether they share DNA. "You are my real family. You are the people Dad would have wanted surrounding me." Grandma reached over and squeezed my hand. "Your mother made her choices, Madison. They were wrong choices that hurt a lot of people. But they do not define you, and they do not diminish the love that exists at this table." As everyone was leaving that evening, Jessica and I sat on the front porch that overlooked the garden. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked. "Going through with the investigation? Instead of just cutting them off quietly, I thought about it seriously. No, if I had just walked away, they would have found other victims. Richard already had a history of this. Mom was learning from him and getting better at it. How many other families would they have destroyed? And personally, do you regret exposing your own mother? I regret that my mother became someone who needed to be exposed, but I am proud that I was strong enough to do what was right instead of what was easy. The legal case had attracted some media attention, and I had received dozens of letters from other people who had experienced similar betrayals from family members. Many of them had chosen to stay silent rather than face the emotional trauma of prosecution. Reading their stories had reinforced my conviction that speaking up had been the right choice. I had also started volunteering with an organization that helped elderly people avoid financial scams. Many of the predators used tactics similar to what Richard had attempted: gaining trust, creating artificial urgency around financial decisions, and isolating victims from other sources of advice. The hardest part about family financial abuse, I would tell the groups I spoke to, is that the people hurting you are often the same people you have been taught to trust unconditionally. Learning to protect yourself does not make you paranoid or ungrateful. It makes you wise. As I locked up the house that night, I thought about everything that had changed since that accidental phone call. I had lost a mother and a stepfather, but I had gained clarity about who really loved me. I had faced the worst betrayal imaginable, but I had discovered reserves of strength and courage I never knew I possessed. Most importantly, I had learned that justice is not always about revenge. Sometimes it is about protecting the next person who might face the same threat. Before I turn off the lights tonight, I want to ask all of you something. Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what was right? Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted completely was planning to hurt you? How did you handle that betrayal, and what did you learn about yourself in the process? Drop your stories in the comments below. I read every single one, and I know many of you have incredible wisdom to share about family drama, justice, and finding your real chosen family. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it who might need to hear it. Subscribe for more real-life stories about standing up for yourself and the people you love. And share this video with anyone who might be dealing with their own family manipulation. Sometimes knowing you are not alone makes all the difference. Thank you for being part of my chosen family here on this channel. May you always have the courage to protect yourself and the wisdom to recognize who truly has your best interests at heart. Sweet dreams, and remember, the best revenge is living authentically and protecting the people who matter most.